Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Immergence Show. I'm so excited for our guest today. We're moving past the hype and into the hard science of immersive experiences. We're joined by Rolando Masis-Obando, a computational neuroscientist and job at Johns Hopkins, and a filmmaker who is literally using AI to read minds and decode how virtual reality shapes our memories. Today, we are going to explore his journey from art to science, dig into what BCI companies aren't telling you, and find out what happens to our brains in virtual worlds. Get your questions ready. This is going to be fascinating. Tag a friend who needs to see this, and let us know in the comments what you're most curious about. Welcome to the show, Rolando. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. I'm having like a little, I'm having some sound difficulty, right? Hear your thing echoed. Hear my voice echoed.
Oh, I'm not sure what's happening, but I can mute myself when I'm done asking questions. So if you don't mind sharing a little bit of your story to our audience about your background, that would be great.
Yeah, so I'm having so much trouble listening to you because I keep hearing something in the background, like repeating. Even myself,
What is that?
I keep hearing that. I keep hearing something in the background. Like when you talk, I hear you echoed, and then I hear myself echoed.
Oh, do you want to refresh quickly and see if it goes away?
Yeah,
We will be.
I'm so sorry about this. I don't know what's.
Just refresh your screen and be back. In the meantime, I want to say hi to our amazing audience. Hi, Ian. Welcome. I'm glad that you are here. Yes, we're going to have a very exciting discussion, but it's a live show, so sometimes, tech difficulties happen. So we're going to give it a couple of minutes for Orlando to join back, and we're going to get started. In the meantime, please say hi. Tell us what's on top of your mind, and we're gonna get started soon. This is a very different discussion from what we've had so far. It's more about the brain and neuroscience of immersive experiences. So, really exciting stuff. And yes, you are working on augmented reality stuff. So interesting. We can ask Rolando about how he has researched augmented reality impact on the brain. I know he's done virtual reality, but let's see about augmented reality. And he actually wants to show us a video that he created about retail. He's going to talk about that as well. Hi, Evo. Yes, Rolanda is the best. Looking forward to it as well. I hope his technical difficulty gets fixed quickly. But yeah, this is what happens when we do things live. But it's also fun because we get to do some, live engagement with you all. Chris says, read my mind and read my lips. But yeah, it's a very interesting topic. We briefly talked about it in the teaser video. That it could be good or bad. On one hand, some of these BCIs are helping a lot of people who are struggling, but on the other hand, we have all these possibilities that big tech could read our minds and provide a lot more potential harm. Hey, Rolando, you're back. We were just talking about BCIs briefly, and you're gonna tell us all things about it, all the good, all the bad. So our audience is already here, and they're excited about the conversation. So yeah, Rolando, if you can please tell us a little bit about yourself beyond what I've shared. Would love to hear your story from your own words.
Yeah, it's always hard to talk about yourself and like sort of summarize into like a few dimensions, like the multidimensionality of who we are. Um, yeah, I guess I can start with like I was born in Costa Rica and I grew up there, and then I moved to the States. And I think really from a young age, my parents, especially my mom, really instilled in me a sort of deep sense of curiosity, especially around science. Just like, and also my grandpa, like, for example, my grandpa in Costa Rica, he'll pick up like any random fruit. Like, so when we would go to the market and like, there's like, just hundreds of people and stalls full of fruits. It's super colorful. I do have a picture. I wish I should have thought about getting one. And he would just grab like a fruit, any random fruit, and then he would always find some shape, something about it that could become meaning in some way. And that kind of, it's just, I guess, from a young age, I was just like became really deeply curious and trying to find shapes where there may not be shapes, meaning where there may not be meaning. And I think that in general, that's probably a really good skill to have if you're a scientist. Yeah, I think just like over many years, I was really curious about the world. I think that I was like always asking the question why to my teachers. I think too much so that they would get so annoyed because I would just like, so they'd explain something, I'd be like, why? And then like, blah, blah, blah. And then, but why that? I was always wanting to understand the question of why something happens, how does it happen? And I just wasn't getting any satisfaction from that. And so then one day I was like, okay, wait, maybe the why is like, is in the universe. So I need to understand physics, and physics will tell me about the whys of the world. And then something one day clicked in me that took me in a different direction, because I was like, the discoveries we've made about the world, about physics, about the universe, about how things work came from somewhere. Where did they come from? And in my head, I was like, oh, of course, the brain. So then it kind of became like this sort of a snowball effect where I really wanted to understand the brain, and the brain was going to give me the answers to the questions that I had. I didn't even know the questions that I had, but I knew I had questions. And yeah, I started with molecular biology, because I thought, okay, I need to understand. If I want to understand the brain, I have to understand it across like it's in all the dimensions like that people use it to use to study it. So molecular biology, then cellular biology, and then I moved into systems neuroscience, and that's where I was working with mice. And then eventually I ended up with into cognitive neuroscience, because I think that is where I was able to really dig into the abstract questions about how the mind works, how we think, and why we are who we are.
Love it. Thank you so much for sharing the backstory as well. So how did you get involved in XR? We're curious.
Yeah, I think I've always been a bit of a techie. I used to animate with Flash, so like Micromedia Flash. Then it was bought by Adobe, and so like sort of telling stories with drawings or some sort of animation was always something that was like very, very present in me. And I also wanted to make games in Flash, and so my very first website was actually a Flash website where there would be like a little animation that you'd get presented. There was this creature on an island, and there was like tropical trees, and then you'd be able to see my portfolio of like my very what I thought was like cool works of art, which is looking back, I'm like, no, that's definitely I was but good job, good job to me. And you'd be able to click. There was like a little play button at the top where you could play like a music from Red Hot Chili Peppers. It was a website that was very me. And I would use that website to sort of understand how to code and how to like sort of figure out ways to make games in Flash. But that dissipated, and then because I got really focused in school. But I've always wanted to do video games, and I even like to compose. And I remember also trying to reach to Flash animators and ask them, hey, do you need music? And I'd try to send them snippets of music that I made to say, hey, maybe this could be the background for your next game or whatever. So like my journey into VR was always going to happen. It just took a while as I stumbled through different ways of telling stories with media. And when I started my PhD, I was trying, like, there's like this big idea that you can't be, what's that? What, there's like a saying, right? It's like uh, uh, master of none, jack of all trades, master of none, and so I was like, okay, I need to start focusing on like less things and trying to be like less diverse. And so I was like, okay, how can I explore questions that I care about the mind, but bring the arts that I like and enjoy doing and bring them together in some way. And it just made sense to combine arts and science and do it for the same pursuit. And so nobody could complain that it's just too many things happening, because it's all in the service of one thing. And VR was a great new tool that was being used in science, and it just made sense. I got to 3D model, I got to code, I got to uh, generate 3 art and environments and worlds, and it just made sense to use it with science at that point.
Wow. So you have the art side and the science side that could look like two opposite sides of the spectrum. So how do you see the connection between these two, the art and the hard science?
Yeah, I get asked this a lot, and I think just from like the description that I just gave, you'll understand that I get asked this a lot also in business. So I also do a little bit of entrepreneurship, and when I've gone to meet investors and things like that, they always question my focus. And for a long time, I thought they were right, that maybe I have too many interests, and maybe this is my greatest weaknesses. But then over time, I think I came to the conclusion, and I've been able to sort of confirm this over recent years. My lack of focus is actually my greatest strength. It's not my lack of focus, it's like this diversity of interests, and they come together really well. With film, for example, you tell stories about the impossible. With science, you try to discover and understand the impossible. And with entrepreneurship, you try to build the impossible. So this idea of pursuing the impossible is just driven by a curiosity about the world, about this need and want to understand and explore. And they align really well, and they provide different ways of thinking. And so I actually don't think that they're quite separate. There's this author called Ted Chiang. Some people might know him from the movie Arrival. He's a science fiction author. And he had a talk that I went to where he made an argument about whether AI can make art. And he was talking about artists, and he said that an artist makes micro decisions about every single step in the creation of an art piece. These are decisions that they make, that they're conscious, they're very intentional. And the end result, the concluding art piece, is the accumulation of all these micro decisions. And this can be even for someone that uses Photoshop, choosing to add blur to one section or hue. It doesn't have to be like handwritten or hand painted or just typing text to tell a story. It can be digital as well. And science isn't that different. You have to make a lot of decisions, and they're methodological. So at the end of the day, there's this orchestration of decisions that come together to try to find evidence for a theory. And what is a hypothesis, right? Like, a hypothesis is a theory, and the theory is a story about how the world works. And in the same way that one follows evidence towards understanding the theory, one follows a character or the plot of a story. And hopefully at the end, after you've traveled through this arc, you find a satisfying conclusion. And in the same case as stories and in science, sometimes those conclusions are not the ones you thought you were going to get.
Thank you so much for sharing. That's a good way to put it. And yeah, there's a lot of overlap in all of those things, and I'm sure your perspective is very different, and that has helped to change the quality of the work that you're doing in every aspect. So thank you for sharing that. I want to take a moment and say hi to our new engaged audience who just joined. Hi, Paige, Casey, Ritika. Thank you all for joining and sharing your thoughts in the chats. Yes, it's going to be a fascinating conversation, so feel free to share your comments and questions, and we're going to get into them. And yeah, so I'm curious, Rolando, maybe you can share a little bit about your current research before we get into the topic of the discussion.
Yeah, so there's a lot of I'm on a lot of different projects. Like for example, I guess like I can talk about one of the VR projects that I was working on. Yeah, so I think one yeah, there's a lot of ways to describe it. So I'm very obsessed about the idea of contexts. You know, context can be the sort of spatial environment in which we experience something. They can be the emotional context. They can be the sort of what clothes we're wearing. Like context is just like this sort of description of a situation of where we're in. And I've always been fascinated about how contexts sort of shape the way that we remember, how they organize our experiences. And I'll give you an example. So I'm going to ask you a question. Can you describe a recent experience with a friend? It can be a family member. It can be anything. Just like a recent experience.
Okay.
Now you're getting interviewed.
That's unexpected. Recent experience with the friends. So I have to think about which friends and what experience is appropriate to share and all of that. Sure. So how deep do you want to go about?
It can be like, you can just describe like 2 sentences or 1 sentence. It's just like a very, very, yeah.
Sure. I wanted to help a friend with something he was struggling with, and then he was objecting and resisting that, procrastinating basically, and that's sometimes frustrating when you are trying to help someone.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so usually when I ask this question, people will say something along the lines of like, recently I was at a coffee shop with a friend, or I was checking out a museum or something like that. You went more through a conceptual sort of situation kind of description. And the reason why I bring that up is that usually it's hard to imagine like a experience happening without it happening at a location, because all of our experiences happen at locations. And the brain can use a lot of different ways to sort of create frameworks or scaffolds to help us understand an experience as it's happening, but also to be able to retrieve an experience. In your example, you went more with like a person anchor, but the brain tends to use heavily spatial anchors, like trying to center an experience around the location in which it occurred. There's this ancient technique called the method of loci, or the memory palace technique, and it was used by the ancient Greeks and Romans. And it was used to memorize stories, actually, and a lot of other things too. And I don't know if you've seen like some of those viral videos where someone's like gets a shuffle deck of cards, and then all of a sudden they have to memorize all 52 cards, or people that can recite 1,000 digits of pi. Those people tend to use this technique to memorize all of that. And so one of the research questions that I was really fundamentally curious about was, what's at play in our brain that allows people to be able to do this? Because it seems it's not like just a trick that you can use. It seems to be it's so powerful that there must be some sort of framework or structure that our brain uses to be able to allow us to have such a superpower. And the way that I started sort of dissecting that was by using VR. And VR is a great tool for this, because with VR, you can design a world with as many places and locations as you want. And the cool thing is that, unlike the method of loci technique, which is a technique that people where people's own memory palaces, where they bind information to rooms in each room of a palace, it's idiosyncratic, meaning that they know what their memory palace is, because they're basing it off of an experience of a location that they know well. So they tend to be familiar places for like the people that use this technique. But VR allows me to create a memory palace that's shared by everybody. So everybody will experience this space and will be able to remember it to the a way that's like consistent across people. And so it's a great tool for this. And so what I did is that I had people explore this environment that I built. It was 23 rooms. All the rooms were very different. They had different music. They had different feels, different colors, different sizes, different shapes. Like the volume would be different. One room that would be very tall. Another one would be like really short. There was even a room that people hated, which was called the empty room. It was a room with nothing in it except really hardcore metal music. But it's actually a really good band, Strapping Young Lad. But anyways, so I had people explore this environment, and after they explored the environment, got familiar with it, I took them out of the VR, and then I took them to the scanner where I scanned their brain. And I used fMRI, and what I did is you basically, the idea is that you take a sort of neural fingerprint of what their brain looks like when they're thinking about a particular room. So they saw videos of the rooms that they had already explored, and I can extract a snapshot that describes that the brain in a sort of empty room state, or like a chess room state, or any state that represents like the room. Then after I take those snapshots, I take them back into VR, and here they go explore the environment again. But this time I did something to each room. I added a big object, a new object that had never been there before. And their job was just to like explore and like try to remember the object. And they didn't have them a lot of time for this. They had about like 10 minutes or something like that. After that, I take them out of VR, and then I scan their brain again. And this time I ask them, tell me everything you remember. And they have to describe the rooms, they have to describe the objects and the newly placed object there. So I have two scans. I have a scan that I took before they had to memorize new objects, and the scan after. So what we ended up doing, and this was like a really interesting find, is that so there's so much in this. Before I describe what we found, there's an important principle in memory that I think is useful to understand. Our memories need to be stable. They need to have high fidelity. If I'm remembering something that happened yesterday and I need to remember that again, 2 days from now, I need that memory to be stable enough for it to be consistent, right? It won't be useful in my mind if it's not stable. We also need them to be protected in some way from interference. Similar memories might start interfering, and you might start forgetting about what exactly happened because another similar memory is getting in the way. And this happens all the time. If you go to the same restaurant over and over again, you might start like bleeding between different experiences, right? And so these two principles matter a lot, because what we wanted to see is like if there's a way for us to quantify the stability of someone's representation of a location, will that stability predict how well a future memory is remembered? And that's what we found. We developed a method to sort of quantify the stability of someone's representation of one of the rooms, another room, or another room, or another room. And then we were able to relate that to how well they reinstated a memory for the object that was placed in that room. What that means, because it's like a lot of words, I know, is that we were able to predict how well a new experience was going to be reinstated just by knowing how stable their representation of their context was before the experience happened. So we were basically predicting the future. We were predicting how well someone's going to remember something just by knowing how well they represent a space. And that's, when you look at it in like a sort of theoretical perspective, it kind of makes sense with what I just described. Our brain needs to be able to do these sort of things. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to make sense of the world. And this way that sort of space or spatial context or location acts as a sort of memory container to protect memories, but also to keep them stable, is a principle that also applies to a lot of different frameworks that our brain might use to remember things. Space is one, the associations between people is another. People call that the person schema. There's a lot of different frameworks, and I can get into detail into each of them. But this is one way that our brain is able to organize memories and then also use that same framework to retrieve memories later.
Interesting. So if I understand it correctly, you use virtual reality as a tool to simulate some of the experiences or, aspects of the, work that could be physical, but it's easier to do it virtual, right?
Yeah, because with virtual, I have so much control about what people see. And it's like I could, and people have done this, where you attach a camera to someone's head and then you have them explore like campus or something like that, and then you put them in the scanner, and then you try to understand what's going on, what allows them to navigate the campus, what's going, but it's more complicated, and there's a lot of potential confounding factors. It's just there's not a lot of control, but with VR you can tightly control someone's experience, and it's immersive. It's real. Your way of interacting in a VR environment is incredibly similar to the way that we interact in real life, even if you're using controllers. And the coolest thing about this is that I had people seated for this particular experiment. I had people seated, so they were like in a swivel chair, and they were just moving and teleporting. And that's all it took. You don't need to have something super fancy. You don't need one of those like, Ready Player One, little walk things. So, yeah.
So I'm curious, for our audience that might be building a brand or, storytellers out there, what does this mean for them? If we can see how the brain is representing the memory from a virtual experience, can we start designing stories that are kind of scientifically proven to have a specific cognitive or emotional impact, or like what are the learnings for others?
Yeah, this is a really, really great question, and I think about this too a lot. As a storyteller myself, there's a lot of things that we can take from a lot of neuroscience in general, and psychology really. But I think like from the experiment that I just described, I think that one extrapolation that we can make, and this is obviously speculative, but it sort of has some logical sense to it, at least in my head. For a story to be memorable, you need to be able to create a context in which characters or some agent is supposed to navigate in that are memorable. But making them memorable is not just about making something look very pretty or aesthetic, because you can have a completely beautiful environment, but it doesn't contribute to the meaning that someone might extract from the experience, right? Like you could be watching a movie in a beautiful space, but you may not remember the space. The experience needs to be somehow meaningfully attached to the environment. And I actually do have like a paper where we actually did look at this. So there's that meaningful attachment to environment matters for creating more cohesive and memorable experiences, so that after someone finishes your experience or your story, they have a strong anchor about what happened. The other thing is that when we build stable representations about something, it might be interesting and useful to destabilize those representations. And so when I think about emotional impact, I think about like the movies that sort of make me tear up are the ones that butter me up first. They butter me up first, get me excited about something, and then destroy my image of what I thought something was going to be, right? And horror movies do this all the time. They'll start with like a happy place, and then they completely disrupt. So surprise and destabilization can be useful. And one way to do that is by attaching motifs to a character or an environment, and always associate that motif stably with something else reliably. So every time that you see that motif, it's always associated with something positive, for example, or it could be negative, and it's consistent. There's like now a sort of stable anchor about what we need to expect about this thing. And then later, you can flip it. You flip the switch. You now make it associated with something completely different, something that maybe if it was started with positive, you now make it negative. That flip causes a surprise. It destabilizes our representation of what something was, and that could be a very cathartic moment in the story. Music does this all the time with leitmotifs. Composers are very well aware of this effect. And it's actually really interesting because I think artists already have a really great intuition about these sort of things. The establishing shot in film is exactly that. It establishes the scene. And you see this throughout almost every single movie. Before you go into a random room, you sort of like have like an overview of like what the building looks like. Okay, we're outside of what looks like a hospital. Now we're inside. That helps people sort of, you instead of like forcing people to make too many inferences about something, you sort of control the type of inferences they make, and you only force them to make inferences that are more abstract when you really want them to sort of allow extra possibilities that you then start to fine tune into the ones that you want for your story. I don't know if that made sense, but that's one way that I've sort of tried to interpret some of the results that I've seen.
Thank you. So basically, first one was the meaningful connection with the environment. So like interactive experiences, right?
Yeah. Interactive experiences where the context is actually meaningful for why that experience is happening there. Like having there are a bunch of experiences that experiments that were trying to understand how context like shapes memory. So they would like have like a green screen and then like have a word, then they would have a red screen and then have another word, and then so on so on so forth, right? And so you think that if they flash the green screen, they're going to remember the words that were associated with the green screen, right? That was a result that was incredibly inconsistent. One scientist would do an experiment and they like, yeah, if we show the green screen, then people are going to remember the words that were associated with the green screen. But the words had nothing to do with the green screen. And that's one of the reasons why people had such inconsistent results with these types of experiments. It's called context-dependent memory. And so one of the experiments that I worked on with my colleagues was trying to understand what is it about how context needs to be used in order for a memory associated with that context to be remembered. And one of the things that we learned is that you need meaningful interactions with the context in order to create a sort of attachment. That attachment, it can be loose, but it needs to be there, really allows that context to trigger memories or help trigger memories with what was associated with that context. And this is very easy to believe. I mean, you walk home to your childhood home, you might start remembering all of a sudden a bunch of memories that you had there, your childhood room, right? Contexts are heavily linked to experiences, but they need to be meaningfully attached.
Like when they say when you meet someone new, you want to remember their name, tie, some feature about them to their name or to someone you remembered similarly. So yes, that totally makes sense. Thank you for sharing that. And then the second point was about that shock or surprise, basically flipping the emotion that we were creating for the person with the story or experience. That is also very helpful. And as you said, it's kind of intuitive. We've learned that by seeing other stories and, other arts. So really good points. Anything else you want to add, or was this two main points about?
Well, there's a lot. I mean, there's a lot. Psychology has learned a lot about how we represent stories and how they sort of interact with how we sort of organize like our interpretation of something, and then later how we remember it. Something that the lab that I'm in works on a lot, and like something that's been used a lot more, and there's like more research being put into it, is this idea of causality. So being able to remember something can be heavily influenced by whether the events that you're trying to remember are causally related. So if like someone's writing a story and they are trying to, you know, have event one be connected to event two, but event two makes no sense as to why it would be connected to event one. There's no real causal structure. There's no reason to believe that they should be associated, but the writer puts it in anyways. People are not going to remember that as well. There needs to be a sort of not doesn't have to be linear, but there needs to be some connection that justifies the event two from event one. And I think this is very important because sometimes, you know, if you're making a backstory for a character and the character acts differently, the sort of from what you would expect given the backstory, you know, you don't believe the character, you don't believe this, like it just you don't believe it, and that disbelief is not like the positive one, like, oh wow, that's crazy. It's more of like I just don't buy it, and you might not like sense that you don't buy it, but it sort of comes out behaviorally when you are trying to tell a story and you cannot remember what happened because the pieces aren't connecting together, and it's easier to remember things that are like linked. And that's another reason why the memory palace technique works so well, because it's not just that they have memorized a bunch of locations and rooms and they just have to like jump to one room to another. The way the technique works is actually that people go from one room and they always go from room A to room B, and always to room C from B. They never do A to C. There's always a linked path that they follow. And this is very important. There's work that shows that, you know, sort of this like sort of linear type of recall is like more optimized and less prone to memory error. And so what that means is, like, in like the grander scheme of, like, you know, storytelling, is I think that you need to have things linked, and it'll help people remember. And having people be able to remember something is probably usually a sign of enjoyment.
Awesome. It makes sense again because it will be more memorable if it's similar to something we have experienced in the past, and most of the things we have experienced have some sort of logical connection and causality. So really good point. Thank you for that. I would love to get into this discussion of brain-computer interfaces that we briefly mentioned in the teaser video. I would love to for you to explain to us what those are, where we are with them, kind of high level, in a concise way, and then we can get into what is the hype and what's the reality and what we should be careful about.
Yeah, I think just generally one can divide brain-computer interfaces into like two camps. There is like the invasive camp, which is basically you have a device that lives in your body in some way. And then there's the non-invasive camp, which is basically a wearable. You put it on your head or you wear it on your wrist. It doesn't need surgery, and it's generally more accessible because you don't need surgery. That's really the two camps. And the techniques in which they the sort of like the hardware of how they're able to detect brain signals also varies across many different ways. But the general idea is that you have electrodes, basically sensors, and these sensors try to measure the easiest way to describe it is like the electrical energy that either neurons or our nerves are using when they kind of communicate with different parts of the body. And these brain-computer interfaces sort of intercept these signals, whether it's in the wrist or the brain, or they try to read them. And the way that we read them can come from many different techniques, and that's where we start getting into the software of like, how is it that these that these devices are able to decode things. That's more the software, but the general hardware is generally the same idea. You have sensors, you put them on the skin, or you put them, you know, inside the brain. And yeah, that's generally the division between how these devices work and what they are.
So hardware and software, and they're done, you know, invasively or non-invasively. And where does AI go into the play? Is it on the software side and predictive models? What is the state of art on that?
Yeah, state of art. Yeah, so yeah, I give this talk, and I'm going to give it actually again in about a week, about the sort of history, the past, present, and future of brain-computer interfaces. And when you sort of look down the I guess the lineage of how these devices have come to be. uh, the hardware, excluding some companies that we can talk about, has generally been the same. It's a sensor, usually metal, and it just tries to detect electrical changes. And what's really advanced in the past, I guess, 2 to 3 decades is really the sort of software that we use to detect these signals, and uh, our understanding of how to make what is really complex more simple. And that's the combination of not just people in neuroscience, but the sort of integration and intersection of engineering, of philosophy, of math coming together and understanding, wait, so we have these high dimensional sort of signals. How can we decompose them into simpler dimensions that we can understand? Or how can we reshape them to sort of understand something specific? And in understanding that specific thing, we sort of uncover something that we can then use to explain a different phenomenon. And I think a really great example of this is with for with EEG as an example. Like, a lot of people focus a lot on alpha waves and like these general uh, brain waves that are sort of related to like either meditation or concentration or something like that. And those have always been decodable, like for many decades now. But what we can do now is sort of parse in more detail, what is it about these sort of signals that tell us about what's going on in the brain. And so, like in the example that I gave about where I was using fMRI, which is also technically can be used as a non-invasive BCI. It's just a really big machine, and it's very cumbersome to use as a BCI. But you can use that machine to decode the brain, and then have the brain and have that brain sort of do something with that. So people can play video games with their mind in a scanner. And there's a whole field that does something like this called neurofeedback, where you read the brain signal, and then you use that brain signal to trigger a something that you want on the screen. So like the size of a ball or something like that. And like, yeah, and like a lot of the mainstream EEG devices that you can buy commercially sort of have like these meditation games where, like, if you like can concentrate and meditate and elicit alpha waves, then like you're able to like have a ball levitate. But the more cool, I guess, more scary also at the same time, research outside of just the groundbreaking sort of more medical side of things, because there's been research that has been done to help people walk again, where there's like, for example, a disconnect between their spine and their brain. So the signals from motor cortex, which is like the part of the brain that sort of helps determine what hand movements to do, like our walking and all that, was disrupted. So it was they the signals weren't getting there because like the spinal cord was injured. So what they did is that they developed a device that would basically two devices, one that would connect to the brain and another one that would connect to the spinal cord to bridge that gap. So they would have signals from motor cortex, and they would have to, like, over the course of a lot of training, decipher the sort of signals that were associated with walking and sort of innervating particular muscles. And then they were able to sort of, after doing that training, innervate. So this second device was also stimulating, and that stimulation was allowing someone to be able to walk again. So there's like these kind of breakthroughs, and I think that breakthrough was from like 2022 or 2023, which is really cool. And there's a lot of work in that space. Not even, I'm not even including all the breakthroughs in like sort of language decoding. So for people that are sort of unable to talk anymore, they're paralyzed, they're in the hospital bed, but they can still think, being able to sort of decode the sort of also usually from motor cortex, the sort of signals that tell the mouth how to move. But those are techniques that tend to use a lot of very hardcore, very data hungry sort of I mean, all these algorithms are like very data hungry, but these are very specific, and like they need models about how the mouth works, about how the pronunciation of like a certain tiny like a, e, I, o, u. All these things are well categorized and trained in order for like a signal to be able to map to each of these things. The newer innovations that I think we're going to be seeing more so are the ones that are also very data hungry, but are also getting closer to what we would call, typically more like mind reading. So in my work, I do mind reading, but it's not, it's not about, like in my case, unlike, if I'm trying to like help someone that's paralyzed, I'm not trying to understand the brain. I'm not trying to explain why the brain is doing something. If I'm trying to help someone that's paralyzed, I need to build something that will help them. I'm not worried about the theoretical aspect of things. And so there's like two different sides of like how you might approach like these questions. And so what I'm seeing a lot more is like this. There's now this sort of in between sort of intersection that I'm seeing a lot more with my colleagues, where it's not just how can we understand something, but like if we can build this thing, now that we know that it works and it can solve some problem, why does it work, right? So instead of like doing a theoretical first approach, you start with more of an engineering approach, and then you go backwards to the theoretical approach. And I think that that is generally due to a cultural change, a shift that has happened over the years, mostly due to how technology has become so drastically involved in every aspect of our lives, something that wasn't as common before. And so there's always this need to sort of like push forward and like advance before other people do. And this sort of, I guess, race that sort of at the global scale across countries has now penetrated and trickled down to individual sort of startups, science in many ways. That being said, there's a lot of work on what I was going to say earlier, the typical mind reading, which is basically putting like this was like the experiment that I'm about to describe was done with fMRI, but you can start seeing how people are going to be using this with like more accessible methodology, even though it's a lot harder with things like EEG or FNIRS because the data is more noisy. But this was done with fMRI, and what they did is that they scanned people and they had them watch movies, and they had them like sort of not verbalize out loud, but sort of think out loud what they were trying to say. And they were able to decode with about 60% accuracy what they were saying without having them move move their mouth. They were able to, as they were watching something, they were able to decode what they were watching. So like if they're watching like someone eating a burger, and like that's the clip, that's the movie clip, there's this person, they have red hair, they're eating a burger. They were able to decode things like burger, food, eating. They weren't able to describe the whole thing, but they were able to get like the gist of it. And that's just the very beginning, and this was like something from 2 years ago. And there's another field that concerns itself with image reconstruction, which is the idea of sort of basically reconstructing visually what your mind is seeing. So if you imagine a carrot, can you reconstruct that image? I can classify that carrot. Like with the methods that I use every day, I can tell you that you're thinking about a carrot. Like if I'm trying to classify for carrots and fruits, I can tell you you're thinking about some food thing. But whether we can reconstruct it with detail, what exactly you're picturing is a different sort of a story, and it requires a different set of methodologies. And that's where AI, neuroscience, and engineering are starting to come together to sort of combine these in a way that makes like the sort of science fiction type of way of mind reading more real every day. And yeah, I mean, yeah, I can keep going.
It's amazing, and I wish we had more time, but I just want to quickly touch on what it means for brands and companies that are serving us, in terms of offering products or services. Do you think soon? I mean, I know Meta and others are working on this, even publicly, that they have the technology to potentially predict what we really want or need. And what are your thoughts on that? What would you say in terms of the technology on that side?
Yeah. Oh man. So this is something very dear and near to my heart. I even started with my brother and a colleague, and now like at Princeton, and now in Johns Hopkins, my advisors, we're all part of a team now that organizes a conference on the sort of ethics of the future of our reality, how our reality is going to be transformed by technology, and what are the important things that we might be forgetting. The first year we had a bunch of really cool people come in that are like, one person runs a company where they sort of decode people's emotions from just their facial expressions, and they basically account for, like, I don't know, what was the figure, like 25% of like Fortune 500 companies use their technology to understand people's emotions. But this person is incredibly ethical, and she's a wonderful human being. So I'm not worried about her. But there's as the technology advances, as the methodology progresses, as the technology starts to become part of our everyday, as for example ChatGPT, there's a lot of dangers that come with it. Obviously, one is like codependency, and I think that there's a lot of people that can talk in detail about how codependency might be an issue. I mean, I can say, at least for now, that I cannot leave my house without Google Maps, right? Like, I am now dependent on my phone to tell me where to go. But this has been incredibly freeing for me. I don't have to worry about how I'm going to get somewhere. I know I'll be able to get there, and this has opened up a lot of opportunities. But I think, like in the case of Google Maps, which seems to be a little bit more harmless, when other things start taking more cognitive load, it becomes a little bit more serious. And especially when these things are driven and motivated by incentive structures that aren't really aligned with those of a person. Like, I have goals, I have desires, I have dreams, and if those don't necessarily align with the incentive structure of the technology that's supposed to help me reach those goals and dreams, then this misalignment is going to cause friction, and that friction is where, like, a lot of the issues that we see are going to be exploited. And it's this friction that I think that we often forget about. If and yeah, I mean, like, I could really dig
No,
deep.
this is very interesting because there are two ways to look at it. Some are directly, as Ned said, are interacting with our cognitive liberty, but at the same time, that Google Map example, they're capturing all your data, where you're going, at what time, and all of that, and then feeding you all those ads. So, I mean, they're directly or indirectly attacking us from different directions, and they're pursuing their own goals and benefits.
Yeah.
But you also touched on ChatGPT and AI in general, and I know you have done some research on robot rights, AI sentience. Maybe you can quickly touch on that as well.
Yeah, I mean, this is a project that I was working on a few years ago, and then I dropped, and then I picked up again just like a couple months ago after like 2 years of hiatus. But I've always been interested in robots. I remember, like, my brother, one of my older brothers, like when I was just a kid, would say, robots, like they're going to become super advanced, and they're going to help us have better lives. Work won't be a thing. This sort of like abundance, exceptionalism that a lot of people like to talk about, and like I certainly like dreamed about for a long time. And I think like the role of ChatGPT and robots in our lives is becoming way more entangled in our everyday. And I was really curious about, like, what does this mean for like the legal frameworks that we need in order for this interaction between humans and AI to function properly, right? Like, we have companies with different incentive structures. Then we might start, like, some people that I interviewed have romantic relationships with AI. What's going to happen to them? How is society going to see them? And what I learned from talking with experts about this, and I think, like, people like David Gunkel or Josh Gellers or even Kate Darling will be able to speak at least way more eloquently and way more specifically about these things than me. But one thing that I learned, at least from David Gunkel, was that a lot of the legal frameworks that we understand today inherited a lot from the Romans. And there was this jurist called Gaius that basically wrote, like, I don't know if it was a treatise, but a bunch of ideas of like how to divide um, uh, the world into basically two things. It was people and persons and things. And when you think about it this way, and he made a very lots of arguments to like sort of put them in opposition. There's laws for persons and there's laws for things. For persons, you might have rights to talk, rights to like sell things, blah blah blah. For the objects and things approach, like you're thinking about like the laws that we associate with property, for example. Whatever that means, locations, whatever things allows, like the affordances of that, properties, and those are separate from like people and thing and persons. And this dichotomy has been inherited in the legal structure for most countries in some way. And this structure is incredibly lacking for making room for robots, because in some ways robots are a thing, but also now the way that they've sort of been integrated into our lives can be seen more as like companions, pets, friends, as Kate Darling might put it. And there's no space for robots to exist in law when there's only a dichotomy between persons and things, because they're kind of in between. And so what a lot of these scholars argue, like Josh Gellers and David Gunkel, argue is that we need to think things more in terms of the relational approach and less of this properties approach, where and like there's like a great quote that I'm gonna put in like the mini documentary that I'm working about this, if I ever finish it, is and Gunkel said something along the lines of like that law is less about what something no, we are who we are, less about because of what we are, but because of how we interact with the world, or something like that. The reason why animal rights became such a thing wasn't because people believed that animals would suffer. They did, but the reason it started coming into law, like protecting animals from abuse, came from like a human exceptionalism approach, where causing harm to an animal reflects badly on the human. So we can't have things in society that make us bad. So we need to protect the animals because we're protecting ourselves. It wasn't until many years later where you start seeing laws where like, declaring, animals as having sentience in some way. And, even now, like those laws aren't even universal, unlike the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. There's also a huge difference between how we might think about robots as having like natural rights, which are those that we give to that humans have just by nature of being human, and there's some discourse. At least the scholars on this topic not very few believe that there's like a true dichotomy between like the potential of giving robots like the sort of natural rights that people have, but. And like oftentimes the argument falls down like, we have to prove that they're conscious, we have to prove that they're sentient and all these other things. But in my view, and the view that I've learned and inherited from like my interviews with a lot of these experts, is that it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if AI is conscious or like if a robot can feel or anything like that. At the end of the day, we need to create a societal infrastructure through legal systems, through culture, that makes space for things that interact with other things. Like you need laws that make life be able to happen. And if you don't have protections or any way to make space for things that are clearly taking space, then you're not doing a good job. And the sort of relational approach of like the interactions, the way we interact with the different things in our world, is a better way to sort of account for these things versus the person versus thing, because robot can't be really a property. They need some sort of personhood in order to navigate. And a great example is in Pennsylvania, and like I think another state, they had like these robots sort of delivering food. And if a car hit the robot in the middle of the street because it was walking through on the pedestrian walkway, who's at fault? Is it the car that hit it? Well, the robot doesn't have any protections because it's just walking there. It's just a thing. It's just property. And so like, are you going to blame like the person that was driving? Well, what they ended up doing is, instead of using AI or robot as terms, they gave robots, without saying robots, pedestrian hood, which is a form of personhood. So they've already started giving personhood of some sort to some of these systems, and the way that they called it is electronic delivery system. That's what
Very
that's the term.
Thank you,
It's not.
Rolando. Sorry, we're running out of time. This is so fascinating. I didn't want to cut you off. I wish we had more time. I would love for you to go through the comments afterwards, answer all these great comments and questions that everyone has put in. Unfortunately, we didn't have time to go through them. Just for a few seconds, if you can just tell us how can people support you and find you, that would be great. And if you can continue the conversation in the chat afterwards.
Yeah, sure. I guess the best way is probably either Instagram or YouTube or LinkedIn. So
you're gonna put the links in the chat afterwards. That would be great.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you so much, Rolando. This was awesome. Lots to talk about more. I know maybe we can bring you back again. But thank you so much for this insightful teaser of all the great work that you're doing and discovering. And thanks to our amazing engaged audience, Ned, Ben, Casey, Ian, Till, and sorry, we didn't get all of your questions and comments. And Noah, Paige, Ritika, Jean, Chris. We're so grateful, Evo, for all of you to be here with us and everyone else who tuned in. We will be in the comments section afterwards and responding to all your great points. Thank you again, Rolando. Have a beautiful rest of your day, everyone.
Thank you for having me. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.